All right, let's cut right through the noise, shall we? You're getting hit with headlines all day long, but what's really happening behind the curtain? Today, we're going unfiltered. We're going to look at why India's supposedly booming economy isn't creating jobs, whether that hot new IPO is a gold mine or a trap, and a clever little trick the banks are using to make their problems just disappear. Let's get straight into it. So, that's really the big question on everyone's mind, isn't it? What's actually driving the market this week? We're seeing these incredible growth numbers, some IPOs that look, frankly, a bit questionable, and some huge risky bets in big tech. There's a lot more going on than what you see at first glance. So let's start with the first big paradox. First up, we need to talk about India's economic story. The headlines, well, they're screaming success from the rooftops. But when you dig just a little bit deeper, a very, very different picture starts to emerge. I mean, just look at this number, 8.2% GDP growth. The market was hoping for, maybe 7.3%? So this is a huge beat. On paper, it makes India look like an absolute global superstar, especially when the rest of the world is struggling. It's the kind of headline that governments dream about. But this is where the story starts to get complicated. Here's the catch, and it's a big one. While the GDP number is booming, the reality for people on the ground is, well, it's the complete opposite. Formal job creation, it's down 20%. And in the banking and finance sector, it's down a staggering 25%. So this is the paradox, right? If the country is getting so much richer, why aren't people finding jobs? It's a classic textbook case of jobless growth. Now, speaking of big numbers that might not be telling you the whole story, let's talk about the next big thing that's about to hit the market, the Meesho IPO. This is a classic tale, you know? Huge returns for the guys who got in early, but a real gamble for anyone thinking about jumping in right now. Just get a load of these returns. Elevation Capital is on track for a mind-boggling 3,550% return on their investment. No, that is not a typo. This is the kind of insane wealth creation that fuels the entire startup world and gets everyone dreaming about finding the next big thing. But that brings us to the most important question, the one you should be asking yourself. Those early investors, they're cashing out with a massive payday. The price is fantastic for them. But does it make any sense for a new retail investor like you to come in at this stage? Is it the right price for you? And this is where you really need to pay attention, because the red flags are there. The gray market premium, which is basically the unofficial buzz, the street's verdict on the price before it even lists, is worryingly low. At the same time, only 10% of the shares are even being offered to retail investors. Now, this could mean two things. Either the big institutional guys know something we don't and are staying away, or they think it's a good deal and they're trying to keep it all for themselves. The big question is this valuation even remotely justified? Okay, let's shift gears now and look at the global stage, because even the titans of tech, the companies that seem completely invincible, are showing some serious cracks right under the surface. It's a story of massive debt, incredibly ambitious dreams, and a brutal fight for dominance. I mean, just take Oracle. They're borrowing billions and billions of dollars to build out data centers. But now you have Morgan Stanley. This isn't some small outfit. This is Morgan Stanley flagging a record high risk of bankruptcy. Bankruptcy. When you see a giant like Oracle taking on this much debt and this much risk, you have to start asking yourself, is the tech bubble about to burst? And hey, it's not just Oracle. Look at OpenAI. They're projected to need over $200 billion by 2030 just to keep the lights on. Yes, their user growth is off the charts, but they are burning through cash at a rate that is just unbelievable. This isn't just a business, it's a massive all-or-nothing bet on the future, and it is anything but a sure thing. And then, right in the middle of all this chaos, you get this headline. Apple has just overtaken Samsung to become the world's #1 smartphone maker. A huge achievement, no doubt about it. But if you ask me, the real question is, why? How? Apple's last few phones haven't been revolutionary. Meanwhile, Samsung is the one out there taking all the risks, innovating with new foldable phones. So for Apple to be #1 right now, with what feels like a stagnant product, to me, that's just more proof that we are living in a market bubble. All right, let me pull back the curtain and show you something I've seen happen again and again. Let's talk about a clever little trick that banks use to clean up their books. Bandhan Bank is doing it right now, and it's the perfect example of how bad loans can just magically disappear.
So here's how the Vanishing Act works. First, a bank gets a big pile of non-performing assets, basically loans that people have stopped paying back. Then they bundle all this bad debt together into one big, messy package. And then they sell the whole thing off to another company. And just like that, poof, the problem is off their books. Their balance sheet looks clean, investors are happy, but the risk hasn't actually vanished. It's just been moved somewhere else. It's someone else's problem now.
And finally, let's look to the future, because the Indian government just made a monumental move, opening up the entire nuclear power sector to private companies. And believe me, this could be one of the biggest investment stories of the next decade. So here's what's happening. The big private giants, think Adani, think Reliance, they can now build and operate their own nuclear plants. But what's really driving this all of a sudden? It all comes down to two letters: AI. The massive data centers that are needed for artificial intelligence, they require a colossal, completely uninterrupted source of power. And nuclear is the only real answer. This isn't just about energy. It's about powering the future of technology in India. This one policy shift is completely reshaping India's energy landscape. A whole new market is being created from scratch right before our eyes. And that leaves us with this final thought. Will this new energy frontier just be dominated by the same giants who rule everything else? Or is this a rare chance for a new player to rise up and change the game? Now that is something to keep a very close eye on.